Next up, we're going to talk about running SQL Server on EC2 Windows. Quick overview of what we're going to cover in this module is selecting the right services, licensing, making sure you got the right instance, the right storage, HA and disaster recover options, and then look at some reference architecture and then do a Q&A. There's lots of things to consider when you're doing this type of database. So you want to make sure that you're selecting the right one for what you're doing or what your use case is. All right, so let's start with the right service. So where can you run your SQL Server's workloads? So earlier we talked about the why. Now we'll talk about the options for running it. As mentioned, you've got RDS, or you can run it on EC2 native. Reasons for selecting one or the other is always recommended to start with RDS, but if you need the full control, then EC2 is your good option. So looking at options for deploying SQL Server onto AWS. Again, as I mentioned, always consider RDS first. AWS, when you're running RDS, will take care of your scaling, high availability, your database backups, the patching, any sort of maintenance, OS patching, OS maintenance, and also your HVAC, etc., your typical data center items. When you're running on SQL Server on EC2, you will be responsible for all of that. AWS takes care of the OS install and maintenance and your traditional data center items. However, you will be responsible for the patching of your operating system on up. So that is something that you'll need to be aware of. All right, so let's look at SQL Server features at a glance and the comparison between RDS and EC2. There are plenty of user guides out there on AWS documentation that supports this. However, some of the highlights that we have are with EC2 instance is supported under a bring your own software or using pre-configured AMIs that have SQL Server already installed. Pre-configured options may not be available on all versions, so you will have to support that using a custom option. If you ever have struggled, either because of expense or technical challenges, setting up multi-site or high availability options with SQL Server instances, those are things that you're worried about or concerned about, then definitely consider RDS for SQL Server as a simple deployment option. And all you have to do is manage a bunch of different checkbox options to decide what you want before launching the RDS instance. And it will set up your multi-AZ SQL Server cluster, leveraging your synchronous replication between two different AZs using database mirroring. If you need a different HA option, such as always on or log shipping, then you will need to run SQL Server on EC2 and manage that yourself. Both platforms do support storage encryption on all editions using KMS. And if you're running Enterprise Edition, you can use transparent data encryption on both platforms. You will need to install third-party tools or database-specific maintenance options if that's the case when you're running the SQL Server on EC2. Otherwise, AWS will take care of everything for you. If you want to take advantage of automated software patching, then RDS is for you, and as well as we're taking out all those tedious maintenance tasks that comes with managing your SQL environment. So earlier we covered licensing in the licensing session, but so I won't spend too much time on this, but basically bring your own license, use license mobility, do software assurance, or you can have AWS manage your licenses for you. Again, if you do have any questions around licensing, you can always write to Microsoft at amazon.com, and they will help you assist with what kind of licensing you need and how to go about making any modifications if needed to your current existing program. Optimization of licensing around your CPUs. So database workloads and enterprise workloads like SQL Server do require a lot of RAM, not just compute bound. So keep this in mind. You should use optimized CPUs if you're going to bring your own license. Other things to consider are when you're running EC2 workloads that are not compute bound, but are incurring vCPU-based licensing costs. Keep that in mind because there is options to optimize your license spending. If you're running workloads that will benefit from, say, disabling hyperthreading on EC2, you might want to do that. AWS does provide you with a variety of different instance types and families based on the workloads you need. So basically, an example here is the R5 4x large and 8x large. Although the vCPUs are much more higher, the active vCPUs with optimized CPUs are the same. So you do have a greater savings when you're selecting the 8x large versus the 4x large when you're licensing your workloads. Other things to keep in mind is SQL Server workloads are licensed on a core model. So again, the optimized CPU allows you to gain more efficiencies while still keeping your costs down. If you want to play with some of the pricing to see what the different cost models are, don't forget that the simple monthly calculator or rather than the new AWS calculator can provide you with those options as well. Also, if you're looking at running workloads that are high in memory, storage, or I/O bandwidth, but do not require high the CPU counts, consider other family classes like the X1s or the R4s, which have a higher RAM to CPU ratio. So again, a lot of this has to do with playing around and understanding what your needs are, what your application needs are, and what options are available to you as far as these two instance classes goes. If you do perform the migration readiness assessment through Stratus 10 or AWS, we can perform those licensing optimization service as prior to your migration, so you'll know your full costs and how to make any sort of adjustments in planning. All right, so again, SQL Server on EC2 and RDS, which should you use? You can have your licenses included when you're running in EC2 or RDS. If you want to bring your own license, your only option is EC2, full control over your instance in EC2. Manage backups, fully managed backups is RDS. Self-managed, always on availability groups, EC2, and AWS managed, but multi-AZ deployment will be RDS. Right. Next, selecting the right instance type. So as I mentioned earlier, it's, AWS provides a lot of different options to you. However, you can just start with the base Windows OS in EC2 instance and then install your own license of SQL Server, or you can launch an EC2 instance which has already been baked with SQL Server from the EC2 Launch Console. Your authentication can be either Windows or mixed in this case. you will manage the virtual machines, storage, security, network, etc. And you will have full privilege to sysadmin privileges on that server. Okay, looking at the different family classes. So again, as we mentioned earlier, it really depends on your workload and how often or what the needs are to support your SQL Server instance. If it's burstable traffic and it's not sustained, say maybe a development site, consider using the T family class. If it's more computational based, consider the C class. Memory optimized, again, lots of family classes there. If you need local storage or optimized storage, there's solutions there for you as well. So lots of options to choose from. So what about storage? How are you going to store your data on the EC2 instance? So again, earlier we talked about elastic block storage. EBS is considered, it's network attached storage, but it will be local to your instance, or use local to the instance, available to any instance type. You can configure optimization on it for either for network IO or IOPS. Some instances are actually optimized for EBS. Others offer it as an option, and it is scalable. So here's an example of the various different types of EBS volumes and how large of sizes that they can go to, along with their IOPS provisioning. As you can see, quite a bit of options. Some of these are selected as part of the volume type, but then you can also add on additional items such as IOPS, throughput, etc. Also, the larger your EBS volumes are, the faster the writes will be, so you can consider that. This is especially true for both the GPU or GP2s, which is the SSD drives, or the traditional magnet disks. All right, let's talk about high availability and disaster recoverability options. So again, talking high availability in DR when you're running this on EC2, which is fully customizable by you, and you can perform multi-region, cross-region peering. You will require third-party software such as SIOS Datakeeper or SoftNAS in order to perform the replication of the EBS blocks when you're doing multi-region failover cluster. And taking a look at multi-region or multi-AZ always on availability group. Again, this is only available when you're running SQL Server on EC2. You can configure it to share file volumes across different AZs, all within one region. If you choose to take it across multi-region, it will support it. However, again, it's asynchronous, but the support is there for an always-on availability group. When looking at failover cluster instances, again, you will need to use a third-party software solution in order to keep that cluster data volume replicated. And you can use, again, SIOS Datakeeper or SoftNAS Cloud for AWS can perform that replication. Reference architecture. So AWS maintains quite a bit of reference architecture for you to have access to. Just a quick search, internet search, will be able to provide it for you. They have a quick start for always on availability groups, which will set you up with public and private to AZs each. Sets up an internet gateway for you. creates a gateway on the public subnet for administrative purposes, sets up NATs for internet access with elastic IPs, does set up the main controller for you as well. And it sets up and configures the SQL Server Enterprise Edition with the always-on availability and configures the security groups for you. Just want to point out there are other Microsoft Quick Starts for applications workloads that you may have. So quick and easy launch and get started. Okay, so summary up, why SQL Server on AWS? The flexibility in your pricing. Provides you with simple procurement and cost optimization. You can basically run Microsoft SQL Server for as much or as little time as you need, and provides you with the agility to run development platforms that can deeply integrate with Visual Studio and .NET. AWS does provide all editions of SQL Server for versions 2008 R2 all the way through 2017. Including Express, Web, Standard, and Enterprise editions. For customers with SQL Server 2017, you do have the option to bring your own license and run it on AWS EC2 Linux instances or Docker container running EC2, Amazon EC2. It allows you to quickly run what you need, deploy where you're going. And we can talk into that a little bit more. And remember, AWS has the largest global footprint with at least 44 different availability zones and across more than 16 regions, I believe. And they're always adding new capacity as needed. Lastly, improve your security posture by leveraging AWS's managed data centers, which are all compliant with FISMA, ITAR, EU model clauses, and more. I believe currently 52 possible different compliance certifications AWS has.